Welcome everyone to our Chiron in Aries series as we look at our Chiron in Aries transiting through the 7th and 8th houses. Here's our housekeeping slides in which you can study with us at EAN 3 different ways, our free weekly audio podcast, our astro library, or you can roll in our evolutionary astrology course. If you want more information, you can always give us a phone call or visit our website, and Leroy will be happy to help you through any details on anything. You might have yourself unmuted, Leroy. Thank you. Not that you can unmute and participate, okay? Here's our beginning slides, which I'll try and go through a little fast. We do these every class before we get into the specific house transits, so we can have a little bit of a standalone class with this. Here's the dates that Chiron goes into Aries and then moves to Taurus. It's in Aries from 2018 to 2027. Here is Chiron's eccentric orbit. As you can see, the yellow dot here is the sun. The white circle is Chiron. It dips all the way inside Saturn's orbit, and it goes all the way outside Uranus orbit. Saturn yellow, Uranus green. So you can see there are time periods it's closer to the sun than Saturn is, and there's time periods where it's further away from the sun than Uranus is. And so this eccentric orbit creates this type of a cycle through Chiron in the zodiac. You will spend 3/5 of its cycle or 30 of its 51 years in just 4 signs, as you can see right here: Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, and Taurus. And we are just finishing up an entire Chiron cycle in Pisces, and it's getting ready to go into Aries. And of course, then generically for all of us on planet Earth, we are looking at initiating a brand new Chiron cycle over the next 50 plus years. The archetype of Chiron, one of the most famous books, Barbara Hand Clow's book called Chiron, I think it's a rainbow bridge, and she called it that because its orbit, of course, as we saw visually, lies between Saturn and Uranus. In evolutionary astrology, Saturn is the individuated consciousness. Uranus is the individuated unconsciousness. And so Chiron was that bridge between what's conscious and unconscious within ourselves. And of course, from Chiron's perspective, the consciousness is to try and get into the body and stay in our body, and then be able to raise or expand consciousness from the perspective of being in our body. And of course, this is associated with the body being associated with Virgo. The unconsciousness is associated with Pisces in a general level, and with the whole perspective of shamanism and ancient wisdom. And of course, that unconsciousness is not only individuated, it can include the collective unconsciousness as well. Chiron's also very well known as what we call the wounded healer. In other words, the mythology of the centaur Chiron, he was immortal and he was wounded and he couldn't heal the wound, and he exchanged his immortality in order to heal himself. And so this then brings in these archetypes of needing to make the wound conscious, illuminate it, bring it into light in order that we can heal it. And as we do that, whatever it is that is wounded about us, it turns into our talents and our gifts. It shows how we ourselves can become the healer. And we all have those healing qualities within us. Since Chiron was discovered in the late 70s, all of the alternative healing became more and more conscious and popular. And this is why Chiron is known to heal excuse me, to rule all the healing arts. And this goes even down to the fact that Kairos, from which Chiron derives, is the Greek term for hand. So that's why Chiron rules healing touch, Reiki, tarot, palmistry, chiropractic, and massage. Barbara Hanclau would call Chironic energy a sacred force. Now, this is Kim Marie's work right here. I have always related to this perspective. I have taught it for years. Behind every manifestation of a physical imbalance is a crystallized emotional imbalance. Behind every emotional imbalance, there's a mental imbalance of distorted thoughts behind it. Behind every mental imbalance, there's a spiritual imbalance or disconnect from source energy. So all illness starts with a spiritual disconnect, which then leads to mental distortions, which then leads to crystallized emotions, which condense down into a physical manifestation that we will call an imbalance or a dis-ease. Now, any healing is the same process. Anything that's called a miraculous self-healing basically starts with a reconnect to universal source on a spiritual level. In other words, an acceptance of the co-creative process with source, an acceptance of unconditional love within ourself, for ourself, and recognizing that unconditional love is what source sends as well. That unconditional love is so free and unconditional that we have the freedom to create disease if we want. We have the freedom to separate from source. We have the freedom to be mean and cruel to each other. So when we can recognize that reconnection with universal source, there's an energetic spark that starts, which then condenses down into somehow shifting our mental attitudes and our mental patternings, and typically on a more positive level. This leads to that emotional self-acceptance, self-love, unconditional love, which then condenses into a physical release of whatever the imbalance or dis-ease is within our excuse me, our body, that allows us to then re-establish an equilibrium or healing within ourself. I'll have more on this with one of my slides later on tonight for all of you as well. So Chiron's retrograde. When Chiron goes through Aries, the retrograde polarity points to Libra. So during those 5 months out of every calendar year that Chiron is retrograde, this is when it emphasizes Libra, and this is going to emphasize that healing art of being able to listen to someone else, the psychology of listening from EA's perspective, the ability to observe someone outside of ourselves from their perspective. This allows us to give as another wishes to receive versus projecting what we want to give on to them from our perspective. It will emphasize the healing gift of opening up the communications between ourselves and another, especially in the form of having some honest communications, which is not always something that is in the majority or popular sometimes with us human beings. We also have to have an openness to receive feedback from others, to, in other words, that equality or that fairness and balance in giving and receiving, but also in listening and speaking as well. This is a time period where there will be a review on where to take action with and for others, again, to achieve fairness and balance. This is where we will look at the whole woundedness of domination, dominating another to feel secure, and being dominated, allowing someone to take control over us. Again, typically in order to feel secure. And this means looking for security outside of ourselves versus being able to find it within ourselves. So that universe, Libra, the other, will point out where we have these inequalities within ourselves and between ourselves and others, and how we can change that when Chiron is retrograde. Now, the Chiron retrograde with polarity in Libra will also ask us, it also is the potential to ask for help when we need to heal any of the wounds that are coming into consciousness for us. In other words, Chiron retrograde in any sign will emphasize throwing off wounding and reaching toward healing. Chiron retrograde in Aries pointing towards Libra will say, how do I accept help from others? How do I receive help from others? How do I help facilitate healing in others as well? It also is a time period to reconsider how we want to move forward and initiate actions in our life. And of course, I look at Chiron in Aries as starting a brand new 50-year cycle of reviewing and progressing healthcare, no matter what country you live in, and moving us more and more into what we would really call universal or global healthcare worldwide, turning healthcare into a human right, not a privilege, turning it into something that we all want to see on planet Earth versus something that the precious wealthy few have because they can afford it. In other words, getting the profit out of the whole healthcare because we want to see everyone have an opportunity to heal. Now, Chiron moving into Aries can also initiate a brand new 51-year cycle of alternative healing coming forth into that picture as well, and coming into the whole picture in the allopathic world more and more and more. And so it's that balance of what we do alternatively and traditionally to have complete health and wellness as best as we can. And of course, you know, some of the distortions with Aries, and Chiron retrograde can emphasize this, you know, that anger and that frustration of not being able to go forward, Aries, with all the freedom when Chiron's retrograde. And so all kinds of increases in the outbursts that we can see on planet Earth, including those who don't understand their wounds, don't know how to heal their wounds. They're wounded, they're hurt, so they've got to lash out and take it out on everybody else as well. Barbara Hanclau said that Chiron always brings an alchemizing process to whatever the evolutionary journey is of any planet, its archetype, and any planetary aspect. So when you're looking at forecasting Chiron, transiting, progressed, or solar arc, forecasting Chiron will have that alchemizing effect on any natal planets. Also, any forecasting planets transiting progressed and solar arc can have an effect on helping Chiron alchemize or heal or bring a wound into consciousness or turn it into gifts. Now, as we move through our chart examples here, Chiron in Aries, where it's going through its transiting house, whatever aspects it's going to be making again, it always must be related back to the natal Chiron signature. Natal Chiron by sign and house and the rulers of that sign and house, and of course any aspects that Chiron makes in the natal chart as well. So forecasting Chiron will alchemize the natal Chiron. And forgive me for all of my fantastic pronunciation of words. Those of you who know me know that I can be very right brain, and pronouncing things is not always my specialty. Also, in general, 2018, we're going to have one more year of Chiron in Pisces, retrograding back into Pisces after it goes into Aries. So 2018 is a major transitioning year between cleaning up all of the old Piscean woundedness, bringing it into consciousness so that we can start a new cycle of healing for ourselves. In general, if we're not able to heal those wounds, or we refuse to look at or heal those wounds, we're going to recycle all that old Piscean stuff forward into Aries. And when we look at the Piscean distortions, if it comes from a victimization consciousness, guilt linked to atonement, we're going to feel unworthy. We're going to collapse on ourselves. We're not going to have that energy to take whatever Aries initiations we need to take. We have to find our Aryan courage then in order to heal. If we're coming from the distortions in Pisces of the victor consciousness, guilt linked to anger, in Aries, here's that anger and lashing out, coming out more and more and more, even to that point again of revenge. I'm going to hurt them before they hurt me. And then in some way, the universe has to step up to the plate and say, not right, not healthy, and force the victor consciousness to acknowledge that it doesn't run the show. It's just as wounded. Both of these are coming from the distortion of woundedness. Neither one are a healthy perspective. So this last year of Chiron transiting through Pisces, you really want to be looking at what is left within me that is so wounded that I must make every effort I can to bring it into the light, to bring it into consciousness in order to heal it. So these are some of the questions that I put together that we can ask for Chiron's transit through Aries. What wounding needs to be made conscious? And as I make it conscious, how do I release it? In other words, how do I give it back to source? How can I co-create with source, helping me heal what's wounded, traumatized, hurt within me? And of course, source is going to have the intuition, the ahas, the understandings to help us heal better than anything else. How do I listen for feedback from the universe, the Libra polarity, especially when Chiron is retrograde? And we have to listen for the feedback on an inner level coming from within us, our own consciousness sparking on something we need to do in a different way in order to heal. And of course, Libra polarity will get that outer feedback from the universe, a person, place, event, situation. Now, how do we ask for help, Libra polarity, whenever necessary? I think this is a rather important one because Aries comes from that me, myself, and I perspective. I like to say it's that 2-year-old that says, no, no, me, I do it. And can we be mature enough to accept support and help from the universe? And of course, I always say, no matter what level an imbalance is manifested on, no matter where the wound, trauma, or hurt exists, how do you apply this process of healing? I just took spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, and said SMEP. No matter what level it's existing on, how do I heal myself spiritually? How do I heal myself mentally? Question marks. How do I heal myself emotionally? How do I heal physically? And then as we're healing, how do I initiate a new process of going forward in my life? Chiron in Aries, as we heal any old wound, it becomes a gift or talent that we are meant to share with others, to share with the universe. It's how, again, we turn ourselves into the healer in any specific way that's being made available for us. All right, that's the review. Here we are moving forward. Chiron in Aries transiting through the 7th house. It is going to be the active polarity, cardinal modality, and the element of air. Libra and the 7th house, active cardinal air. And of course, this house transit, it's like looking at Chiron in Aries in its opposite signature. This house transit can feel like you've got Chiron retrograde the entire time. Here is where we want to heal the wounds around our relationships, not only with our intimate partner if we're in a relationship, but also with family, square to 4th house, and with career, square to 10th house. This is where we're going to have to look at any codependencies we might have with in our lives, where we want to project onto relationships. Another word with Libra 7th house is when we get into relationships of any type beyond casual acquaintance, where do we want to project what we expect back from that relationship? I give to you, I expect something back. That conditional, I will love you if. Can we fulfill our own needs in some way so that we minimize what we want to project out onto the universe via relationships? And of course, what can start to show up here as we initiate the second half of the circle or the second 6 houses is where we've been damaged in our ability to trust another human being. That can be a real strong example of where we can have some wounding if Chiron in Aries is transiting through the 7th house. And of course, if you look at it from the perspective of SMEP, you know, we've got to trust source first, then trust ourselves to be able to trust someone else. So one of the things that we've really got to look at with this transit, even though it's 7th house, polarity first, we've got to go back and rebirth a relationship with ourselves first and our relationship with universal source. In other words, not substituting the lover for source. And those of you who hear me teach, I have this phrase in which I say, the relationship you have with yourself is identical to the relationship you have with universal source. And the relationship you have with source is identical to the relationship you have with yourself. They're one and the same. So Chiron coming off of Pisces, that's what it's been all about. And moving into Aries, 7th house, it's really going to test to see how well you have been expanding this relationship with source energy through yourself. And then whatever that has evolved, healed, and rebirth will extrapolate out into your relationships in the universe. Now, what can happen here is we can also have, with this transit, a denial of needing a relationship. I don't need anybody. I'm doing fine on my own. It can, you know, again, by the fact that our species has 2 genders, and it takes the biological act of sexuality in order to create an offspring for our species. It brings in the whole issue of relativity. Inner side of Venus, Taurus, relationship with ourself. Outer side of Venus, Libra, 7th house, relationship with others. So relationship denial is not healing. There's a wound there. We can go to again to those relating extremes that we talked about earlier, dominating, dominated, and here we're having to heal into equal giving and receiving, heal into equal listening and being heard. This transit is where we really search for objectivity in our life. Aries and 7th house are polarity archetypes in the zodiacal wheel. Polarities, the opposition, is to bring in objectivity, to be able to look at something from two completely different perspectives and balance them and incorporate them into one. Some of the wounding with this house transit that can be revealed is where we may want to present a mask of ourselves. Let me be who I think you want me to be so you like me, versus being able to truly express who we are in all of our natural essence. And then, of course, part of that balancing that we talk about here, this Chiron transit is going to have us learning how to honor time alone and time with others. And EA, as we say, listening to that intuitive hit of when you've got to go be by yourself in order to become aware of something, in this case, to heal something, to honor sense of self, but then honor the intuitive hit that you get that I need to socialize, that I need help with healing something, that I am to be out there helping someone else in their healing process. In other words, the balance in relationships is not static. It ebbs and flows between being alone and being with another. And this Chiron transit is learning how to honor that ebb and flow all the time. And then another thing is that ability to balance when we need to be the leader, Chiron in Aries, and when we need to allow someone else to be the leader and we support them in their leadership. That will be an ebb and flow as well. It won't be one way or another as we go through this 7th house transit with Chiron. All right, so there's some sparks of what we're looking at. As I always say, it may not be the be-all, end-all of all of the archetypes. If there's something I forgot, by all means, please point it out to me. We'll take a look at it. And so we're going to move right into our chart as we have been doing, and I'll see if Leroy can unmute our volunteer. She's in the Northeast, so we're going to see if she has electricity. And I'm going to take a drink of water. And I'm going to ask if I have Leroy. Hello, is anybody out there? Are you ignoring me, Leroy? Well, I'm going to keep speaking and give some of our environmental... Okay.
I was
there we go.
I was multitasking, doing our data entry project while you were doing such a great job with Chiron and Aries. So I think
you weren't listening.
Of course I was. I got you on audio all the time. I just had I unplugged my headset so I can listen to you while I'm multitasking. But that's fodder for another feeding. So I think I have volunteer number 1 on the line. Is that true?
Yes, it is. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can. Hi, sweetie. You have electricity.
Hi. I do, thank God. Yeah.
Are you in the midst of bad weather?
Yeah, we're having a nor'easter. I mean, I'm not far from Princeton, New Jersey, and Princeton apparently has been completely shut down. Last Friday we had a nor'easter and I lost power for about 5 hours, but so far so good today. It started snowing around 1 o'clock, and you know, they originally predicted like 1 to 2 feet. But I live particularly close to the Jersey Shore, and we generally get, when we get precipitation, we generally get more rain, or the snow turns to rain. So we got a couple inches here now, but it doesn't seem to be as bad. Last week it was very high gale winds, and a lot of the power lines got knocked out. So far, it's so good here with that.
Yeah, the storm you're getting now, it started out by us in
Oh, did it?
yeah, it actually started out in the Dakotas, Nebraska. We didn't get any weather, although we've had a fair amount of snow this winter, but we last Friday, Saturday, 70 miles per hour wind, which is not, I mean, I know you can get it really strong out there. We typically don't get the winds that strong, but one thing that Leroy and I have noticed over the last few years is the winds just get stronger and stronger and stronger. And I lived in eastern South Dakota, which was prairie, okay, old farm girl. One of the reasons I loved moving to western South Dakota, which is mountains, is that we got rid of the wind, and I got rid of the mosquitoes. And it's like, oh, geez, more wind again today. Oh, wind again today. So I think for us, the climate change, one of the things for us is wind. And then, of course, if you live in the midst of the pine trees, it's like, okay, you know, is it going to knock down a tree? You know, sometimes we'll get winds around here that'll take, we've been out in the mountains driving along on back roads, and we'll follow a mile or two in which you just can, every tree's broke off halfway. And you can just tell that there was big wind swirling through a canyon or something. And so I live in midst of pine. And so it's kind of like, okay, I don't want the wind.
Yeah.
But okay, we could talk about the weather forever. Let's
all
talk
day.
about you.
Yeah, let's talk about the weather. All of a sudden, I got cold feet. No, I'm kidding. I'm teasing you. You know I'm a Scorpio. You know that.
I do. And for our listeners who are not aware of this volunteer and I have been through Roger Wilger's deep memory processing workshops together. So we've been through those past life regression therapies together. So we have some history.
So we're like scorpionic blood sisters.
Yes, exactly. And we figured out that we have sons that are real close together in age. And so even though their charts are different, they have similar aspects in their chart. So we went back and forth with that whole thing for several years as well. So you come from a Jewish background, you know, have been spiritual for a long, long time. Both your parents are deceased, mom 2015, raised in a fairly liberal, open-minded household. Your nickname for dad was the benevolent dictator. You were raised middle class. Your dad actually took you out, kind of separated the family from the Jewish synagogues when you were about 12, if I remember correctly, because they started charging money for better seats with some of your religious ceremonies, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
And so you ended up marrying a Muslim man who immigrated from the East. You're divorced now. You have, again, the one young adult son that we just spoke about. However, you married someone who also was not a fundamentalist. He was raised pretty fairly open-minded. in regards to wanting to move west, move into Western lifestyle, lives a Western lifestyle, works in the Western world, etc. You are single. As far as I know, you've been single for a while. You're a writing coach and editor. I know you're a professional astrologer, and I like to use the word label. I don't like the word disease. If you've noticed, I use labels and imbalances. I like to, sometimes even though I can't pronounce words all the time, sometimes I deliberately switch off words to arrest the thinking pattern and make us look at something differently. So I like to say you're labeled with the multiple sclerosis imbalance. I don't like to say you have something. It's just like, a label is something we can choose to change the label. We can choose to do something differently. Of course, we've got a Pisces soul here at 2950 Leo. She is so close to being a Pluto Virgo, she can taste it. Pluto's retrograde. She has, that was the other thing. You and I are very close age-wise as well, even though I'm 2 degrees Pluto Virgo. So we're in that mini generation where Uranus was in orb of squaring the nodes. That's the other thing that we share. Both have Uranus in early Leo. Both of us have South Node Taurus, North Node Scorpio, square the nodes. Resolution node is over here. The South Node, as you can see, we've got a Mercury retrograde here. The Sun conjunct the South Node, fruition, relive, mixture of both. And of course, you've got the North Node with Jupiter and Neptune sandwiched in between, or it's sandwiched in between them, and they are both retrograde. Focusing a little bit on Chiron, very tight Mars opposition to Pluto. Mars is sitting on the Pluto polarity point, and it is new phase Chiron at about 22 Aquarius in the 6th house. So Chiron is within orb of opposition to Pluto. And Chiron is pulled into this Mars new phase. So this starts to come in, when you have a conjunction like this with Chiron, as we had said, you look at forecasting planets to Chiron, you look at forecasting Chiron to natal planets, and then forecasting Chiron back to natal Chiron, you look at Mars. You can't look at Chiron without looking at Mars. And by the way, you have 7 Chiron aspects if you haven't went through and looked at that in detail, okay? Chiron is Venus is a waxing in conjunct to Chiron, or waxing semi-sextile, excuse me. Mercury is a waxing sextile to Chiron, okay. The moon, that was it. The moon is a waxing in conjunct to Chiron. And we have a nice trine with Jupiter here. And there was another sextile to Saturn. So you've got Chiron. You've got Chiron kind of right in between, you've got the Mercury-Saturn trine. You've got Chiron sandwiched right in between this right here, okay? Now, because I know you have a background in astrology, I'm just pointing some things out. I'd like to hear from you a little bit. Give me your thoughts on this natal Chiron signature for yourself, and I'll start playing off of you. But how do you give me some.
Well, I started studying astrology probably a year after my diagnosis, my multiple sclerosis diagnosis, which is in March of 2000. This year I'll be 18 years diagnosed, and one of the things I want to say just up front is that I'm kind of like a success story, because 2 really well-known doctors, I come from New York originally, I went to New York to get diagnosed, and they both predicted that I would relapse within 3 to 4 months of my diagnosis, and that relapse never happened. So I did follow some mainstream, I still am on a mainstream medical medication, which was new at the time. But I made so many changes because I was just after my Uranus opposite Uranus and Neptune square Neptune. It was midlife. It was just before my 42nd birthday. So I went very deep. So the first thing that I did when I really started studying, Chiron, was to look at where I had, I guess, submerged my personal well. I mean, the first thing I recognized is this Chiron in Aquarius. I was always an outsider. I was never like the popular kid at school, I was fat when I was little, so I was somewhat shunned, but I was fat and smart, so that sort of automatically puts you in the nerd category, I guess, I always had one or two very good girlfriends, so I didn't have any problems with that, but I never really, whatever, never went with the cheerleader crowd, you know what I'm saying? So I think I developed a little bit of that. Oh yeah, sure. I don't want to be a member of any group that'll have me as a member. And that sort of, maybe with the nodes and the sun square Uranus kind of set me up to be an outsider. When I really started getting into the astrology, like I said, about a year after I got diagnosed, I went into the Mars-Pluto opposition, and then, Chiron comes along with that. And you mentioned that, I refer to my dad as a benevolent dictator. My father was never cruel, never unjust, never physical, never violent, but he had a temper. And he used to get frustrated a lot. I now recognize him as high strung. And so he would just take it out on my mother or us and, yell for a while, get it out of his system, and then he would be fine. Then it would be like, hey, who wants ice cream? So I think I kind of developed this capability to kind of hide, when dad was mad, and that, I didn't want to be on the radar, kind of. I'm a Cancer moon. I was like, I'd go in my room or if I get yelled at for something, I'd go in my room and I'd sulk for a while. But it was when I had the medical diagnosis or label, if you want to call it that, that I began to really explore through astrology, which had been an interest of mine as a kid, but I never pursued it, where my personal will was really stymied, and why I didn't always do what I wanted to do. I did what other people, and at that point I was in a marriage. I was miserable. I had my son. My husband turned into a dictator, which I guess, duh, and he was less benevolent than my father, but he also wasn't violent or cruel. He was just controlling, and it was like, I married late, so I'm like, why are you controlling me? I mean, I've already had my life. So I think there was a perfect storm of things that sort of, I feel like I woke up. And when I woke up, I was like, I don't have to keep sort of bending over backwards. I mean, I'm a Venus and Pisces square Saturn too. So, and Venus is my South Node ruler and the ruler of my sun. I would rather merge with someone in 7th house and, kind of placate or go along to get along. And it just became so obvious at a certain point that I couldn't do that anymore. And I think, it was astrology really that saved me, because it really helped me open my consciousness. And the other thing I'll say is that about a year after my diagnosis, I got a new set of MRIs, which is the only diagnostic tool they really had at that time. It's really pretty much still, but to see whether the disease was progressing or not, MRI of the brain. And I showed no progression. Now that was such a huge relief after I'd had 2 doctors like a year before, say that I was going to relapse maybe, like 6-7 months before, that I was talking to one of the pharmaceutical reps for the company that makes the drug that I decided to go on. And she invited me to be part of a patient advocate group. And that was hugely life-changing to me, because all they did was ask us to share our story. Now, I'm not without cynicism, and I you know, realized, or came to realize shortly after, that we were helping the drug companies sell their drug, you know. But the truth is that whatever it was, whether it was the drug and the combination of a mindset change and my working my way more towards being independent and, you know, freedom oriented in my marriage and my life, I started to be able to talk to people at patient programs and share my story with them, and to tell them that this wasn't a terminal illness, that there's life after a diagnosis. And I could see, like, I was at a particular patient program, and the first time I had a conversation with a gal who said, "Oh, you've been on this drug for a year, really? Tell me about it." And I could see the fear, like, literally drain out of her eyes. And, you know, years later, when I was reading Melanie Reinhardt's Chiron, the Wounded Healer book. And to me, it made so much sense when I looked at my chart, and I was like, wow, I totally get that. I totally get having something that sets you apart from the norm and being so wounded, and then being able to share the story and help somebody else who was just frightened out of their wits. You know, because at the time I was told when I was diagnosed, because I was numb from the waist down, that I would be in a wheelchair in 10 years. You know, and that's the kind of thinking that was around then. They don't do that anymore. Things have changed quite a bit.
Wow.
But, you know, that is what set me to go, and please, everyone, pardon my French, but I said, hell yeah, fuck no, you know, not me. I'm not going to be in a wheelchair. I'll be goddamned I'll be in a wheelchair. So I think that alone is sort of an awakening of the Mars, you know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So just very briefly recapping for anybody who might be listening to this somewhat new, can you see, just listening to our volunteer, the woundedness in initiation and, you know, sparking herself, being able to be free to live her life how she wanted to live it? You know, were you, remind me, only child? Were you an only child?
No, I have an older brother who's 3 years older, but he's developmentally disabled. So I had a really strange childhood where it was completely normal up until a certain point, and then intellectually I surpassed my brother, and I became the one who was like the only child. It's like I'm the only one they knew was going to go to college and things like that.
Right.
So, you know, it's a little bit of an anomaly.
Right. Yeah. Well, you know, if you want to look at this Mars new phase Chiron, you can look at it from the perspective of the family, and family putting so much energy into you, coming off of the situation with the brother, being in, you know, relationship and marriage. In other words, there were just all of these early factors where you didn't have the initiative. And if you remember what she said, it was the Uranus opposition to itself that really started breaking her out. And then I can imagine as Uranus moved over this natal signature, you know, when it went through Aquarius, it would have also been highly awakening for you to go, wait a minute, I have to take charge of my own life. And then taking charge of your life and willing to heal yourself. I mean, I think that you do have somewhat of a remarkable self-healing story when you look at this opposition of these two planets to your 12th house Pluto. And remember, for those of you who don't know this, in evolutionary astrology, Jeffrey Green would teach that you look at the 6th house cusp and planets in the 6th house of where you will see the manifestation of imbalances on a physical level. And you look at the 12th house cusp and any planets in the 12th house as the spiritual origin of where the imbalance is sourced from. So when you have a 12th house Pluto, they have been on prior life journeys of spiritualizing their relationship with source energy. You know, consensus, are they going to be born again Christian, or are they just trying to find something that gives them a sense of meaning, value, morality in life? as you start to individuate, they can rebel against that kind of stuff. There is no God, but then eventually the individuating, spirituating states of consciousness start to become more and more aware. If I don't have a relationship with Source, I don't have existence in life. So here's what I was talking about when you look at those miraculous healings of coming back, and we're talking 30 degrees Leo here, and it's retrograde. So the 30 degrees Leo can be a soul that says, I can heal myself, but it's retrograde, and it's retrograde in the 12th house, which says, oh, wait a minute, let me review this. Where does the real healing energy force come from? And one of the things for a Leo to do when it gets that Aquarian polarity objectivity, then Leo is channeling creativity. It's going to the ultimate creator and channeling the creativity through it. So it's then in Leo 12th house, looking at, there's a double signature there to almost see the ultimate creator. And so, excuse my French, you know, while you were saying whatever you said, hell no, or whatever, you know, you in your own way was sparking a relationship with Source to whatever degree it was conscious, and going, I'm not going to buy that. Source, let's do it differently. So you were tapping in consciously, unconsciously, to whatever degrees. I'm going to heal this. And then you're bringing it over into that polarity manifestation. And here, if we look at that objectivity, Aquarius, to look at that consensus labeling, okay, with your chironic physical wounding, and just go, I'm not buying into that labeling. So I question, how much was it the new allopathic drug, and how much was it your own soul really being able to spark with Source and channel that all the way down into, as you said, express your will, Mars. But, you know, express this ability to go, however I can heal, I'm going to heal. You didn't you didn't accept the 6th house victimization is what you did. You looked at, you know, 6th house Virgo, cup half empty, cup half full. Okay, what can I do? How can I go forward with this? So that's the natal signature. Let's move to forecasting, if it's okay. But thank you for letting me being able to really point this out, you know, in this signature for you.
Well, yeah, can I just say one quick thing?
Sure.
I can't answer the question that you posed about how much was one and how much was the other, but I do know, you know, fear caused me to go on the medication. I did look at alternative methods, but I'm way past the point where I have any doubts about it or whatever. The medications that came on the market only within 3 years before my diagnosis, before that there was nothing. So it was really revolutionary for those who were diagnosed. But it slows the progression. So what happened is I saw to this day that there's no progression. So from March of 2000 till now, no progression. However, you're 100% right. I would say that I had slowly and incrementally a slow awakening of that Mars principle that saved my life. So, you know, I at this point, I would say that both of them work, but that is the most important thing. I could have gone on a medication and, like you said, chosen to be a victim. And I recognize that. I said to myself at one point, I could go back to bed every single day, because my son was only 5 years old. I could put him, you know, on the school bus or whatever, and pull the cover over my head and feel sorry for myself, or I can get the hell out there and do something. And that's what I did, the latter. So I just want to say, yeah, I think if that hadn't happened to me, my life would have been much more miserable. So I am one of those people who can say, you know, thank God I was diagnosed, you know, in that weird way. And, you know, but that was a huge, huge part of it. You're 100% correct.
Yeah. I would also say, of course, because when we look at the Western Hemisphere, you know, here's the relationship factor. And as it goes through Virgo, you know, this is where we have to do the adjustments of self so that we can hopefully enter into relationship as an equal. You know, as you yourself gave the conditioning factors with Uranus square the nodes, you know, with the introvertedness of a 12th house Pluto, moon in Cancer, this also, you know, early on, not having the ability to come out in relationships, I would say there is some level of woundedness that has come through various ways with relationships. And of course, all of this can bring in the whole intimacy factor from previous lives, this life. So as you've experienced the Chiron return, as Chiron has started moving through Pisces, as it's went over your Venus, there's been layers upon layers of healing on emotional levels. You've had mothers passing. As you know, you've in the last couple of years, Chiron might have been just beyond this a few degrees. I would probably say you are the main benefactor in charge of your brother's health. Is he in a facility?
No, my brother was what they used to call high functioning, and my parents were both educators, had the foresight to get him employed. My dad was a professor, and we lived right behind the college he worked at, and he took my brother up there when he was 17, 18 and got him employed in the cafeteria. He's now 62, and he's been there for 43 years or something like that. So I'm now his guardian. He went out on his own 8 years ago when I moved my mother from New York to New Jersey, and has been on his own ever since with supervision between me and a social worker and a case manager and his employers. So yeah,
Sure.
no, yeah.
Sure. So while you're, as you said, your guardian, so there's the relationship activities that are going on here, but not quite as direct as if he was in facility or something. But transiting Chiron, finishing up the healing and all of these relationship factors, and you can probably yourself know all over the place who's all involved. As it switches over into Aries and you finish up these last 6 degrees in Aries, there is good possibility that you're going to be initiating a lot of stuff in relationships. And who knows, is there the potential to bring in a new partner with all of this karmic signature here? Is there the possibility that you may bring in work relationships from the 6th house natal aspect that is going on? Will there be some spiritualization of relationships, or perhaps some spiritual relating coming off of a 12th house Pluto, coming off of doing EA, spiritual astrology, something that initiates there? It's quite possible because mother is moved on, son's graduating from college, living his life. Maybe there's a grandchild, who knows? I don't, you know, you don't know, but I would say that you could have some surprises that might come along in the whole relationship thing here. And if nothing else, at the very least, as we've looked at it from healing on a spiritual, psychological level, you can be finishing up a lot of relating reviews this last year in Pisces. And then you can have a lot of new perspectives on relationships in general that might come through for you. And then those new perspectives can be that energetic force, that healing energy that then brings something into manifestation. You know, with this Chiron, or excuse me, Uranus in Leo over here, square the nodes, you know, I don't know if you will spend the rest of this life single. It just, and I'm not saying you're not comfortable with it. I'm not saying you're denying relationships or anything like that. But, you know, and this 8th house energy right here, remember 8th house, how it can either go from, and I don't, we can have time periods in relationship, and we can have time periods in relationship with ourselves. Now,
Well, it's,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Can
No,
I?
you go ahead. Yeah.
Venus and Pisces in the seventh with a Neptune ruled seventh has always made me the martyr, in relationships. And what I found, what you said about the sun ruling the 12th house to be really true. I professionally, when I work with authors and others, through the astrology, I feel like I am a cheerleader for people's creative expression. And I've become more and more so over the last couple of years. Like, to me, we all have a God-given right to express ourselves. So that's one thing. And the other thing is with the Venus and Pisces, I ended a relationship. It was back in 2013. Then about a year later, we got together for a while again, like 6 months. That didn't work. And so that ended. And I've been single since. And I really said to myself, I really want to get a handle on this relationship pattern that I always repeat. And I don't want to go into relationship again until I do more work on myself to figure out how to withdraw that Neptunian projection from the 7th house. And I'm still working on it. But I wanted to, concentrate. The other thing is, I got a South Node in the 8th house, and I don't even know how to express this, but there's been some inheritance. I've been lucky. I've been working from, on my own since 2007, but not always making the best living, but I've managed to survive. And so striking out on my own to make my own real money is I think one of the missions with the North Node in the 2nd house. So I'm concentrating on that now. And I feel like that I need to do that first, and then relationship will just naturally follow.
Sure. And what I'm hearing you say, and thank you for your feedback, is coming off of some of these relating patterns that, you suggested, and being everybody else's, cheerleader in your work. Some of that work initiations can just come through, or excuse me, some of the Chiron and Aries initiations can just come through that whole work arena. 7th house squares the 10th in general. Okay. And so, yes, you have this fascinating energy between needing to rebirth my own ability to create my living, having some fruition in which you've had prior efforts that say you get to have some resources come through for you. So yeah, that's not to say that this energy here with resources doesn't have something to do with work and career. It definitely does. And as you look at Chiron moving out of the 7th house and initiating into the 8th, it's quite possible then it could start to accelerate an ability for you to bring in your own resources. And this will come back to this Chiron natally in the 6th, in which there may have been some woundedness from the work environment as well. Because, 12th house Pluto's, as we, say in general, it's like, oh, crap, I have to go to planet Earth? I have to go back in a body?
Too funny.
And you've got it emphasized right here,
Right.
so here's this, woundedness of getting grounded on planet Earth that, you've had to literally deal with, okay, and deal with, just with sometimes perhaps the pain or the numbness of your, labels with the woundings in the body. So, there's been so much of, okay, how do I get in the body? Okay, how do I go through day-to-day life and existence? And as you've sparked this life force, renewing this life force within you on planet Earth, coming from a 12th house Pluto, you're going to, Aries, spark new kinds of ways of being in relationships, spark new kinds of ways of working with planet Earth's resources. Leading a little bit into both 7th and 8th house transits as we've been looking at that. I would say you can spend 2018 whenever Chiron, especially when Chiron retrogrades back into the last 2 degrees of Pisces, you know, really just ask the universe, show me these old relationship woundings. Show me these old relating patterns that have had me, again, here's, you know, this right here, distortions, relationship woundings. Show me these old patterns of being hurt here on planet Earth that has me not wanting to be in my body. I've made so much effort to be in my body. Show me where I've been hurt with the world, so that I can initiate those healings and charge forth in my new chironic cycle of really being able to grow and succeed on planet Earth. So I think you can carry that intent not only through Aries, but you can do it even into Taurus. When Chiron gets into Taurus here, crosses over that south node, crosses over that sun. Here's more, you know, putting the Aryan effort in. Here's more, you know, resource rewards and resource manifestations that can come through.
Wow. Kim Marie, I got to tell you something. I love you. No,
don't make me cry.
Oh yeah, I can make you cry. No, thank you for that. You know, I'm not young. I just had my second Saturn return that ended last October. You can see by my birth date that this year in April I'm going to be 60. So it's just funny because I think I'm one of those people. When I was young, I was a late bloomer, you know, and not physically but emotionally, you know, and it's funny because I just, you know, you're giving me hope that for the future, because I think it's easy to also fall into the trap and say, oh, please, I'm getting so old. You know, how much time is there anyway? But no, I mean, I also have another, you know, knowing I was going through the second Saturn return, it's like, okay, the last third of my life is going to be the best.
Yes.
So you validated that, and I thank you for that.
Oh, yes, yes, definitely, definitely. And if I can, I'll point something else out for people, because I've come across a few charts with, you know, Sun conjunct the South Node. Jeffrey Green, Sun conjunct the South Node, and he brought through evolutionary astrology. I'm going to put a slide in of the alternative healing that I do, and ironically, I started it in March of 2000, sweetie. And another gentleman who brought through this spiritual healing technology with photographs, and he had Sun conjunct the South Node. So in my world, I have evolutionary astrology and energetic balancing, and I always say I got EA and EB. I got the best of both worlds. And so I don't give up on the creativity that comes from a Sun South Node conjunction. That also has a lot to do with your ability in the 8th house in Taurus to rebirth your ability to heal yourself. And you're going to have Chiron the healer. So we're really jumping ahead, everybody. We're jumping ahead 8-9 years here. But you're going to have Chiron come over this transit, or transiting Chiron come over this natal signature here, you know, as it moves into Taurus. You got Uranus doing it right now.
I was just going to say, honey, I got to live through that.
Well, but look at Uranus is just really sparking you awake on this, the woundedness in the relationships. Chiron transiting 7th house, late Pisces, finishing it up. Not only is Uranus waking you up in regards to resources and creative talents right here, okay, but it can wake you up to the wounding here from relationships, okay, the relive with this conjunction, all right, and you know, Mercury bleeds into this. Where did you give your power away in relationships? You know, 12th house Plutos can give their powers away to the de facto goddess. And you know, that could have happened in past lives with these signatures, which is then created wounding to your own abilities to express your will and do your own thing creatively. So Uranus will wake this up, and transiting Chiron will then totally shift how you look at relationships And then moving into the 8th house, it'll continue that, but it will also shift how you look at expressing your evolutionary intent for yourself in the world. Chiron would just be the leading edge of healing all this old relationship wounding and, you know, sparking you forward into relationships in new ways. And again, all types of relationships, you know, personal, professional, intimate, you know, even your relationship with yourself as you bounce off of the feedback of others.
Right. Wow. That's very encouraging. I so appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, you are most welcome. Let me start to check in. I get going and I forget to pay attention to time. Okay, I think I'm doing pretty good here in regards to time-wise. So, Leroy, if there's anything from the board, you're welcome to ask their questions or unmute them. So questions from anybody who happens to be listening. Any questions from you, volunteer?
Nope. But yeah, we better move on.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, timekeeper. All right, volunteer. Last call. Any questions from you? Or Leroy may have muted you. He's my good old timekeeper because I get into a chart and forget.
I can unmute.
Oh no, that's okay.
No, I'm good. No. She's like, no, don't put her back on. She'll ask too many questions. No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, volunteer, for being willing to volunteer your chart. And it's wonderful to connect with you again, sweetie. And oh, by the way, I have to tell you this while you're on, even though you're muted. Our young son is moving to Colorado to pursue new interests. He's not going there for the cannabis. He's going there for the restaurant and chef opportunities in his world. All right, so just had to share that tidbit. Let's move on then. All right, Chiron and Aries transiting through the 8th house. Here we start to look at the passive polarity, fixed modality, and the water element. Passive fixed water is what Chiron is going to come through and heal and rebirth. So one of the biggest things that will come from this house transit is where there's a wounding around the dual desire nature, those separating desires, returning desires. And then, of course, the human-made distortions are just continuing to undermined us, that if we have any desire at all, we can feel guilt around that. And what we learn through natural law is we've got to exhaust the separating desires. And it's the exhaustion of the desire, a new lover, a new job, a new this, a new that the returning desire becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. So where has our desire nature been wounded? Where can we have denial of those desires? And where can we also substitute the separating forces for universal source? Just like we have separating desires, returning desires, Pluto, Scorpio, 8th house is where we recognize the separating forces and returning forces in the universe. What religion would call evil good. Those separating forces are always going to try to undermine our relationship with source, and the manipulation tool they use is power, selling our soul for power, more power. So there will be woundedness around power versus powerless issues. We'll move this on from the 7th house. 7th house, we call it dominating and dominated. That's in the 8th house as well. It becomes more of having power over, power under someone. There can be power over issues, power under issues. It can go beyond relationships. And so what happens as we move into that 8th house is it can become underhanded when it's distorted. We want to manipulate in order to feel secure, manipulate in order to have power. We get the obsessive compulsive complex. 7th house relationships, it's It's goodbye, hello. We can let one go and move on to the next one the next day. Eighth house won't let go. It's fixed modality. It's fixed water. So we can obsess and compulse over someone in relationships. And that in and of itself is a wound because we're not taking care of loving ourselves enough. We can have the good old betrayals of trust and abandonment, the famous wounds that'll come around the sexual wounding and the love affairs and all those types of things that happen. Wounding around commitments. Someone who says they want to marry us or commit to us and runs away, or fear of commitment can come from this. If I really commit to you, I'm going to lose my sense of self, and you've got to have strong enough second house polarity, self-reliance, so that you can risk committing to someone. Eighth house is where we've got to experience our deepest emotional fears. And those exposures then, hopefully in the healing, lead us to self-love, lead us to self-reliance, all of the self-words, second house polarity. And of course, eighth house is shared resources. So we can have all of the fears around resources in our world and around sharing resources. You know, where have we experienced the loss of resources in past lives that may surface some way with Chiron transiting the eighth house? How can we learn to be resourceful ourselves? Remember back, second house Taurus, ultimate resource is source itself. And so all of that energy that comes up around scarcity, wounding, betrayal, losing resources, and the healing of that, and being more than their stuff. Of course, one of the ultimate fears is the fear of death. And is death a wall? It's all over? Or is it a door that we cross through to just continue on in our non-physical world? And that energy has us moving into having relationships with non-physical entities. Relative to separating forces, returning forces, there can be non-physical separating forces or entities that always try to influence us and keep us separated from source. But there can also be the non-physical entities or forces that are what we will call the guardian angels, or the grandmothers, grandfathers that, you know, want to help us on the path to returning to source. So those non-physical entities can be separating or returning. So all of this stuff can be some of the archetypes through Chiron and Aries transiting the eighth house. And again, ask me a question if you feel I've missed something. And what we have to do, though, is look at it relative to the specifics of the soul in question. We have to do that good old observe and correlate. So here we are moving on to our next chart. And Leroy, if you want to unmute our volunteer, and you guys can just speak up and interrupt me. This chart has 7 Chiron aspects as well. Our volunteer in this one also came from liberal parents. Dad was a lawyer. Our volunteer has woundedness from his anger. Mom was in social work, raised upper middle class, which she feel was part of a source of guilt for her around having those resources. 2 older brothers, yet grew up feeling quite alone. She has been married for 14 years. She has a daughter and son. She has an identity with Wiccan and paganism and all of the new agey things. She's been spiritually searching for a while. She does have a college degree in fine arts. She's currently a stay-at-home mom, but she's searching, what do I do with my career? She has worked with depression off and on most of her life. She has a label with fibromyalgia, which has created feelings of chronic pain and tiredness. And the fibromyalgia label is recent, so if we get our volunteer live, we can, check in a little more detail with that. Before I go into the chart, let me just stop and see, do we have our volunteer, Leroy?
I think so. Yep.
All right, volunteer, do you want to speak up and see if you're mic'd good?
I sent her a private message, and she said she was mic'd up, but we don't hear her. So all I'm saying, maybe you need to simply make sure your 1/8-inch plug is all the way into your computer. Another solution is maybe to re-enter, but I have you unmuted. What were the initials of our second volunteer, Kim?
Her first name initial is A, and I don't remember if she was comfortable.
I have the right person, yeah.
Okay. All right. I will say something for those of you who are regular listeners. Whenever I'm late to get on, it's because I did not shut down my computer and reboot it just before I went and followed the email into the webinar. So I will say this to you, to all of you, whenever you're going to participate in anybody's webinar, I don't care what service it is, if you want to interact live, a lot of times it works best if you shut down your computer and reboot just before you follow your links into the webinar. I don't know what it is, but we can get caught up in all of our stuff. And as long as that's the last thing I do before I get onto a webinar, I never seem to have any trouble getting into the webinar or being able to.
Kim, hold on. Wait.
Oh.
Yeah, there she is.
Can you hear me?
Hello.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello.
Can you hear me now? Yes, we can.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's no problem. That's no problem. But so remember that just for in general, because, we love these webinars. So we're always just trying to educate everybody. Closing down, rebooting your system always works good for making sure everything connects up, especially when you want to be live on a webinar. Let me quickly point out some things in your chart for sake of the recording, and then we'll jump right in. Okay, sweetie?
Sure.
So we have a 1972 volunteer, 2941 Virgo. So this one can feel Libra bleeding in as we look at Pluto at 30 degrees Virgo in the first house. And of course she has moon new phase at 4 degrees Libra. We have another Sun South Node conjunction. This time the South Node is balsamic, the Sun. We have a Chiron over here, 17.5 Aries, 8th house, opposing Uranus, full phase opposition. Chiron makes a nice trine, or Mercury makes a waxing trine to Chiron. It almost bleeds Mars into it as well. Mars ruling Chiron by sign, okay? We have Chiron making a waxing sesqui-squadrate, 1.5 to Neptune, and it is just 20 minutes from being exact. So it's an applying, it's still first quarter phase, just getting ready to go into gibbous phase right here. And ruler of Chiron by house in the 8th, of course, is back over here to this first house, Pluto. So Pluto, moon, comes into the story of the wounding with Chiron, and so does the Mercury new phase to Mars in Leo in the 12th house in this situation. Let's see if I'm forgetting anything in regards to, we do have the Sun in a first quarter square to Chiron. So that becomes part of the Chironic story as well in regards to aspects. And then pointing out here, I think there's sextiles with, yes, this Venus-Saturn makes sextiles to Chiron. So boy, every single volunteer chart we've been drawn in, we've had many, many Chiron aspects. It's just like the attraction is there, isn't it? Volunteer, I know you study evolutionary astrology. I can't remember how much you have studied. Do you feel comfortable giving some feedback on your own natal Chiron for those of us listening?
Yeah, I'm freezing up. You better go.
Oh, that's okay. No worries. You feel free to interrupt me and jump in at any time, Chiron, in Aries, okay? Because you're gonna have Chiron return coming up. So we're drawn in the Chiron-Uranus opposition, and I don't know if for those of you who remember this, there were 41 oppositions exact. So many people have this, but in this case, we've got the Aries Libra coming in. So we've got that Uranus Libra mini generation of, you know, trauma around codependency in relationships, you know, the trauma around perhaps the inequalities in relationships, trauma around self-reliance in relationships. And so here's Chiron over here going, well, I am working on my own independence, but I have some type of wounding around really being myself in deep, intimate relationships. And so there's woundedness between balancing self and others in relationships. And there may also possibly be woundedness around resources. Remember, the EC over here has guilt around having resources, you know, perhaps aware of others who have less. So that has built up something within that needs to be healed. Ruler by sign over here, Aries, Mercury, Aries, Leo, 12. I would say there could be some woundedness around finding her own voice and perhaps her own initiative, having a lot of interest in spirituality, but maybe a late bloomer in regards to being able to feel like she can be a healer or speak about healing or teach healing, anything, you know, in that regard. Okay, yes, you're feeling this.
Oh, completely.
Also, this waxing sesquisquadrate, if no one's ever pointed it out to you, and I'm always, always teaching, look at those semi-squares and look at those sesquisquadrates, okay? Because they're half squares and they're just as impactful as squares and oppositions. You've got Neptune down here at 3 degrees Sag retrograde in the 3rd house. So here's some understanding of natural laws and principles. Here's interest in all kinds of natural healing ways. However, with this waxing sesquisquadrate, okay, you've made an effort to be you've been the healer before, and here's a classic signature of just losing your life as a healer. Okay, yeah, and what it is again, we are minutes, not degrees, we're minutes first quarter moving to gibbous, okay? And then in the natural zodiac, that's that 15-degree Leo mark, where, you know, in the middle of Leo, hey, I've got a lot to share. I got a lot to create. I got a lot to, let me heal. Let me be the healer. And yet, as the patriarchy distorted everything, you know, this can be a signature of where it really got kiboshed. You know,
Yeah.
first house Pluto's, for those of you who don't recognize or know this, those outer planets, and we can include Chiron in this as well, okay? There's a lot of astrologers who have said those outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, when you find them in the first house, and volunteer, every move you make is amplified, okay? Every sound or move you make, we hear.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, we're
You're
really
okay. You're
really
okay.
we're really gonna help that freeze up with that Venus balsamic conjunction to Saturn in the 10th. With
Well,
don't
Venus
move.
knew. Venus knew. Yeah. Okay, freeze, freeze. But Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, when you find them in the first house, it can be a possible indicator of past lives in which they died young. They didn't get to live out the lifetime. Now, I also would put Chiron in the first house there as well. So therefore, that can be extrapolated when you find Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in Aries, it's the same archetype. Well, you know, there isn't anybody alive with Pluto in Aries. You know, nobody alive with Neptune in Aries. They're going to be born in the next decade. There's a few with, you know, Uranus in Aries as it's been as they've been finishing up their Uranian turn. So we don't have a lot of those Aries signature. We do with Chiron. So this could be a signature as well, especially 2nd, 8th. I didn't survive. My partner didn't survive. Children didn't survive. Okay. But we've got this signature here of Pluto in the first. Okay. 30 degrees Virgo. I mean, am I worthy of living? You know, there's a whole self-worth issue there. That can also then have some reiteration with Chiron and Aries in the 8th house. And if that is part of the soul's conditioning, well, how do I put any energy into anything? Because I don't have any life force, or again, from a soul level, I don't necessarily have knowledge of lifetimes being an elder. This could even be reiterated with the South Node in Cancer and 11th house, trauma as a child, trauma with children, you know, life force, sun that could come through. Now, I by all means just want to point out, volunteer, I'm an opinion, okay? Nothing is gospel, but it could also be some of that energy, you know, that spiritual sourcing of some of what manifests on the physical level here. So feedback with what I've said up to this point on natal Chiron.
Oh, dead on. Yeah, totally dead on.
Do you have memory, or have you done any past life therapy work in which you've uncovered lifetimes that have been short-lived, even short into, you know, adulthood, young adulthood?
I had a dream that I was burnt at the stake as a witch, and I actually I remember running into a church, and there were people chasing me, and I think there were women in front of me, and I pushed them into like I just remember pushing them through a door, and then shut the door so that they survived, and then I remember them wrapping me with rope to a stake, and then yeah, setting the fire. Yeah.
Oh, welcome to the club. Sometimes I think it's the EA club, but it's more in general. It's who of us doesn't come through from what we call that daemon soul, DAEMON, you know, nature in which we, you know, held out for the truth. You know, we were the herbalists. We were literally the healers. And of course, you know, Dark Ages, Middle Ages Europe didn't like that. And so, you know, this is classic signature, death by fire, you know, death by beheading, death young as a young adult. Okay. So what this will set up for this natal Chiron signature, okay, is initiating the reclaiming of your power. Okay?
Yep. Totally makes sense.
And being able to stand in your own power with others. Finding equal power with others. And of course, what's that going to do for our first house Pluto with 7th house, you know, Pluto lessons, 7th house evolutionary intent? You've got to go through all these relationships, you know, the ones you really, really like, you know, and those that just raise the hair up on the back of your necks. I'm having this flash of a little detail, I'm just going to share it because I'm just going to guess it's relevant in some way. You know, I'm a little Midwestern farm girl, and I'm white, you know, European, and I was, you know, just raised to be a wife and a mother. And although I had, you know, white boyfriends, because that's all I knew, there wasn't any other races in my school. Maybe there were a few Native Americans, and I don't even remember. I didn't have any in my class. And I remember when my first marriage broke up and I got into my middle 20s, and when I went through my divorce and I started waking up to metaphysics, all of a sudden I had this intense repulsion to European white males. And I don't know where it came from, but it was just like, I don't want anything to do with them. You know, and I ended up having some long-term relationship with other men of other race. And ironically, I ended up marrying a white European male who I just absolutely adore and love. So I was able to heal some of that energy. But what I was picking up on with the 7th house Pluto polarity point, and even this Aries Libra thing, is you perhaps having races or social classes of people in which you have visceral reactions to them. And so as Chiron in Pisces has been finishing up the 7th house for you, and Pisces, by the way, it rules pigmentation. And so it actually rules different races, because while we're all the same, it takes that minuscule amount of difference in pigmentation that creates different skin colors, which creates all those superficial, you know, differences in race that we talk about. Not to say there isn't natural differences just by geographical locations. I would say you've probably been exploring opportunities to heal classes of relationship with Pisces in this 7th house, with Chiron in Pisces in this 7th house. Okay. And I would say if you feel any kindredship to the similar story, whether it's racial, you know, differences or whether it's social class differences, you know, as you look at Chiron in its last year through Pisces, you would want to be making peace with that within yourself, okay? And then in that with others, and being able to call on source energy to relate to source well enough to get into your own unconditional love. You remember how, here's another one. I remember when George Bush was president, and somebody, you know, the second George Bush, and everybody kept saying, well, can you wish him healing and love? Oof. And I remember having to go through that, and I you know, I would really work with that. I can't say I've been able to do it with Donald Trump, although I do actually work with that. I see him as a blessing in disguise. That's how I'm labeling it right now. So I try to get to peace and neutrality with that. But this can be something that happens with the 7th house in general, because we've got this diversity of relationships, this diversity of these contrastings to work through. And especially with Pisces, can you open your arms to all of them? It doesn't mean you agree with them. It doesn't mean you're empowering them. But you've got Chiron here over this last year opposing your Pluto polarity point 3 times, sweetie.
Mhm.
Then you have it going into the 8th house. So there's all this inner peace that you want to make with the contrast of souls. And one of my little cliches is, and I do this a lot with parents, you know, divorced parents trying to raise children from different philosophies. Sometimes we learn by example, and sometimes we learn by contrast. And one is not better than the other. Sometimes it's what that soul is needing to draw in. So you want to take all that contrast and you know, Libra, 7th house, and be able to heal that as much as possible, so that as Chiron moves into Aries, so okay, let's get to this 8th house transit, please, Kim. As it goes into that 8th house Aries, then you're going to move into the natural power of reconnecting with source versus falling into the Aryan anger. Okay? Because the separating forces can use the Aries anger distortions to try to trip you into your disempowerment again. Does that make sense?
Completely. I just started a new business representing a health and wellness company, and happily they are very into the woo-woo and super into law of attraction, and you know, just they're very supportive, and it's a direct selling business, but it's not at all like a pyramid scheme, like nobody's at the top and everybody else is being stepped on. It's like actually, like I said, very supportive, and everybody wants you to succeed. And I don't know, it's been really empowering to be with all of these women who like are from all different walks of life. And this company is really wonderful. They're organic, and you know, all these, they use European beauty standards anyway. They're really environmentally progressive company. And which I love. And the part of me that's always been involved with herbs, like it just wraps up so many different parts of my life till now. But this, I've been studying law of attraction on and off for a while, and it really syncs up a lot with my study of astrology. And it's just been so resonating with me this past month. Like, I don't know what has, maybe it's that Chiron going into 8th house, but I just feel like, yeah, just that connection to source is just amplified. I'm always been an empath, but I mean, I literally went into a knitting store today to poke around. I hadn't been there in a while, and the woman working there was just in a crap mood. And I just like asked my guides, like in my head, I'm like, okay, you know, like I'm not asking you to like heal her or fix her, but you know, help me just raise the energy around her. So, you know, it's just not so heavy. I'm like, I can tell, like I could just feel she was hurting, like something was wrong. But, you know, I wasn't going to intrude and ask. But I just was like, felt really connected to source and my guides, as far as being able to kind of just raise the energy. And by the end of, you know, my visit there, she was smiling and laughing. And, you know, I knew I hadn't like done any big healing, but I just also knew like I had, at least for that moment, helped to kind of, you know, get her, raise her energy a little bit, so she wasn't quite so, you know, hurting. And, you know, I don't know. Anyway.
Well, you got transiting Saturn, you know, just went over this Jupiter right here. Okay. And so it's tapping into your own emotional awareness and being able to mature your emotional empath energy into new levels. It's transiting Chiron in the 7th. It's Neptune in the 7th, holding healthy boundaries. Regardless of what's going on in the world, there's nothing that says you can't have your direct connection with source under any and all circumstances. Neptune in Pisces, Chiron in Pisces. And, you know, sometimes it gets hard to be in the world and remember that we get our own direct connection with source, regardless of where anybody else or the rest of the world is at. And that's one of those healing remembrances to understand as Chiron finishes up in Pisces. Wait a minute, I get to be connected to source no matter what. In my body, beyond my body, outside my body. And so that then again, as you heal that, there's a whole new energy that's going to open up for you of really being able to understand what power and powerlessness is. There's woundedness around that with relationships. So being able to stand in your own healthy power with, regardless of where the other person is. You know, you won't let anybody, it's the courage to not let anybody power over you. And it's the courage not to be sucked into powerless. Now, Chiron is going to oppose your moon, probably not 2018, but it's going to probably do it in 2019. Hold on a second. I'm going to do my handy dandy little thing. You'll have 3 times. You'll have Chiron oppose your moon 3 times in 2019. So you got a 1-2 punch going on with aspects right here that are quite active for you, not to mention the fact that you're going to get the squares to Jupiter. We got to bring that one in as well. So hold on just a second. Let me see. You're only going to have that 3 times. So as we were looking at Chiron, let's just go review here, okay? Chiron in Pisces is going to be activating all this healing energy with relationships, your soul's evolutionary intent, everything we spoke to this point. Chiron's then going to go into this 8th house, and it's going to oppose moon 3 times. So there's going to be really strong opportunities to emotionally heal next year. And the moon rules this south node by sign over here. Okay, so remember, emotional trauma from family of origin, from past lives as a child, you know, healing with your own children, okay, and helping them feel empowered regardless of what's going on planet Earth. Chiron in Aries is going to be activating all that. Chiron, before it leaves the 7th house, first quarter square to this Jupiter that I mentioned Saturn just went over. Even though it went over, even though Saturn only went over to Jupiter once, it shifted signs. And so there was that, you know, there's a big shift between Saturn and Sag and Saturn and Capricorn. You know, it's a growing up, it's a maturing energy coming into its own sign. It's like, okay, I'm going to take responsibility for myself. I'm going to take responsibility for my own growth on planet Earth, for my own emotional maturation on planet Earth. Chiron is going to double emphasize that. Okay, so Chiron in Aries gets to say, all right, I get to have my own energy in relationships, regardless of where anybody else is at, and I get to have my own energy in helping me mature forward in new ways. Again, and correct me if you feel it's different, I just feel that you've had more than one lifetime in which you didn't even make it out of childhood. And so that, what am I going to do when I grow up? You know, it will unfold for you literally your entire lifetime, this entire lifetime. So I would encourage you to look at Chiron moving into Aries as, oh boy, what am I going to do when I grow up? What am I going to do differently? I got to explore this. I got to explore that. And 8th house is another one of those houses of courage. EA will use the language, you know, utilizing the willpower to move forward, to evolve, to, you know, go in the directions we want to go. Aries 8th is going to be a double signature for that. So the closer Chiron gets to natal Chiron, and all the Chiron returns in Aries are about initiating and rebirthing courage, initiating the will. Mars ruled, initiating that ability to go after what we want in life, to go after that desire nature, and that natural exhaustion of the separating desires. You know, sometimes I even say, okay, Spirit, you know, I really want this XYZ in life, and I realize it's a material thing. And thank you for helping me in my journey of creating this along my path. Thank you for helping me exhaust the desire for this. And so I'll actually look at the separating desire and turn it, how can I turn it into gratitude and thankfulness that I actually get to create it on my way home? And that's what you can look at with these Chiron returns in Aries. Okay. Now for you, regardless of what it is you want to manifest as a desire, and you know, you've expressed, especially, you know, as children grow up, okay, you know, we always live vicariously through our children because we love them. In your case, you may be living through your children because you didn't get that chance to do that, but the children are going to leave home, Mom. And so you're right. You've got to find, who am I beyond a marriage, beyond being wife and mother? How am I going to initiate creativity in my life? And yes, having that bring in resources from the universe. Creating resources is one way that the universe hears us. Okay, so you know, it can be part of you healing woundedness around resources and initiating new understanding of resources. And the resources are tools to do things in the world, you know, and you know, the whole thing of, again, if we don't feel like we're worthy of inheriting resources from the universe, especially 30 degrees Virgo, the universe will find ways for us to give resources away.
Yep.
So can you see resources as just the medium and the tool in which we just exchange energy in the universe? So I'm not saying you're not doing that, but you will have even more empowered ways of doing that as you put that energy into searching and understanding in those directions with Chiron. And so you can even then turn to be empowering of others in how they're going to use resources in the universe that we share. You know, I think you were the one that sent me an email recently about the hemp thing.
Yeah.
Right? Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And about, you know, all the different ways we can just utilize hemp and create with hemp on planet Earth. And, you know, that could be another one of those areas in which you're going to initiate new ways to utilize resources. You probably have heard me talk about the whole public banking bandwagon. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I know that from where you live, it is quite active in, you know, all up and down the Western coast. The public banking movement is pretty active. And you know, there's some activity on a statewide level, but there are a lot of the major cities along the West Coast that are starting to really get onto that bandwagon. That could also be another way. So in other words, it's not, when the 8th house transit, it's not just rebirthing our wounding with resources and how we utilize resources. It can also have us being that spiritual warrior with collective resources and helping everybody heal their woundedness with resources and, you know, learn new ways of how to, you know, collectively experience resources. Mother Nature is abundant. Mother Nature has all the abundance in the universe. And I mean, just, you know, look at what we've created on a planet like Earth. And so tapping into some of those understandings can be some real initiations with the 8th house transit. Now, let me address it from the perspective of intimate relationships a little bit, maybe some of it for you, but I just want to take a couple minutes just to share this from the perspective of somebody else listening. You know, there is a possibility of the natal Chiron here having woundedness in intimate relationships, but transiting Chiron through the 8th house, it's going to bring up in various degrees where we've had the betrayals of trust, the abandonment, the, you know, love affairs and triangles, and, you know, people just not honoring honesty and commitment in marriage type relationships. So Chiron's going to bring that up to the surface, and it's going to bring it up to heal it. It's going to bring it up to initiate new ways of going forward. And for some, Chiron and Aries in the 8th house, it's going to give us the courage to say, F you, old partner, I'm not going to put up with this anymore, and I'm going to go a new direction. For some of us, it's going to say, partner, we're going to create new commitment patterns between us, and we're going to create new patterns that have equal giving and sharing. Equal giving and sharing of power, equal giving and sharing of resources and responsibilities, especially with raising the children square Cancer, if that's the case, with all of the career things and the chores in a household square Capricorn, if that's the case. And if Chiron and Aries transiting through the 8th house, the partner abandons us, we have some lesson in initiating self-love. We have some lesson of loving ourselves deeply enough to step into our own empowerment. Again, I'm not saying this may be your situation. Feedback, volunteers, I start to recognize time.
Oh, well, it's just uncanny because I was talking to my therapist this morning and basically, you know, finally had an aha about a betrayal that has happened in my relationship, and the fact that, you know, I'd really like to initiate some couples counseling. So let's go.
There
Everything
you go.
you just said.
There you go. Thank you. That can definitely be something that we, you know, would look at with that transit. Okay. And then of course, for the in relationship, Chiron Aries transiting the 8th house, there can be all the various degrees of wounding that come from a sexual perspective. And here is the opportunity to initiate or rebirth healing on sexual levels. Can we feel safe enough to express ourselves sexually? Can we release any game playing Libra polarity around the homosexuality issue? Because Libra, 2nd house polarity, there can be that withdrawal of sexuality for manipulation purposes, for control and power purposes. Or we can be needy around it and use sexuality to be loved. And so all of those distortions, Chiron, Aries, 8th house, will bring them to the surface to be healed in all the various ways that they can manifest. And again, it'll be as unique as we are as individuals. Volunteer questions for me when regard to your chart?
No, it was really dead on. Yeah.
All right. I'm sure there's other details that we may not be catching right at the moment. There's always another detail in the world of astrology. It's the one thing I do not get bored with. That's what I've loved about it after 30 some years. So all the best to you in your soul healing and really moving into those new relating patterns. All the best to you in really being able to coalesce your own spiritual growth, square Jupiter. All the best to you in initiating your own self-love and healing as Chiron opposes your moon.
Right. Thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome, sweetie. Thank you, and thank our first volunteer for volunteering your charts. I'm going to move through these real quickly. I've not put this slide in. Back in 2000, you heard me say my EA, my EB world. My Pluto Virgo gets self-conscious of sharing my other work. I'm not my Leo doesn't go overboard very well.
You're stuttering, Kim. Whenever you try to promote something important, you stutter.
It's my Pluto Virgo. So I've been involved with this work for almost 2 decades. There's a book up there. If anybody's ever interested in it, contact me. I can get you an electronic copy of the book. This is something that I have done for 18 years. And the healings that I have done on a physical, emotional, mental, spiritual level have been absolutely wonderful. Here's our website if you want more information. Basically, this is a technology where we take your photograph and we impart 500,000, 500,000 plus healing frequencies, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's nonstop via a photograph. Remember that SMEP? We go right to that energetic level. Before there can be a physical manifestation of anything, there has to be the spiritual disconnect. So we impart frequencies along the physics scale that are so fine that it goes to that energetic level. And when you balance the frequency of a Cancer, then any level of manifestation dissipates and moves up and out. I've had several self-healings from my painful menses when I first went on to aches and pain imbalances. And oh, by the way, from our level of energetic balancing, for instance, you may think there's 2 types of diabetes. We have been able to discern on an energetic level hundreds of variations of the diabetes frequency. Any type of disease label, we find buku balancing frequencies, and we add new frequencies each and every week. And both, by the way, of interest to both of these volunteers, what we have found energetically is many times the frequency of multiple sclerosis. I went into my energetic balancing mode, and the frequency of fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome. Almost all the time, those imbalances have been caused by the bite of an insect. There are many disease imbalances that are imparted by the bites of insects, and we continue to recover those imbalances in an energetic form and put new balancing frequencies on. Anyway, if you want more information, you can go to our website on the screen. You can contact us. Leroy and I are both happy to send you more information. There will come a time when this will take over the allopathic world. My Chiron in Aries of the female and male perspective. Spirit of God, Goddess, come through me. Mind of God, Goddess, speak through me. Heart of God, Goddess, love through me. Body of God, Goddess, I am. One more week of Chiron in Aries. Next Monday and Wednesday, we'll do the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th houses. Then we're going to repeat the Uranus. We're going to repeat the same type of cycle with Uranus and Taurus, free Mercury retrograde in Aries. And here are the oppositions of Chiron that we've mentioned so many times. And here's Jeffrey Green's unconsciousness reprogramming exercise. This is a self-hypnosis tape that you make in your own voice, that you play at night and when you go to sleep. And it works for reprogramming the unconsciousness. We do affirmations in consciousness. Money comes to me easily and often. Every day in every way, I heal myself in every possible way. But this helps us do it on an unconscious level. And here are the 2 slides that give you Jeffrey's points. And then I did my little Virgo thing and went in and did the details with how you actually create the self-hypnosis tape. All right, everybody, thank you for sticking with me as I get caught up in charts and forget time. So thank you all the best, and we will see you next week for our last Chiron Aries transit class. Good night, everyone.